My name is Caroline Baird-Forristall, and I'm the Extended Learning Program Teacher at Urbandale High School. This is for Education 701 at Morningside College. My research topic was the impact of geographic information systems on secondary students' geographic representation skills. My problem statement is two-pronged. First, the National Assessment of Educational Progress done in 2010 found that only 27% of 8th graders were proficient in geography. Only 20% of 12th graders were proficient, and these results have been stagnant since 1994. Secondly, geography skills are necessary for today's students to balance and interact within their environments. There are high-need careers of becoming growing importance because of population growth and climate change. These jobs address issues of mobility, housing, and water use, and they're found in realms like civil engineering, marketing, and environmental science. My interest with this study began by examining the impact of extensions on gifted students' geography skills, but GIS quickly emerged as a potential extension or even universal tier teaching strategy, and I became intrigued with the potential for GIS in a regular classroom. My work is framed by the Iowa Core Standards for Social Studies Instruction and the multi-tiered system of support for universal and also above grade level standard students. The inquiry strand of the Iowa Core Standards include something called the inquiry arc, and one of the 4 dimensions of that inquiry arc is applying disciplinary tools and concepts. This is where my work actually fits in. By the next school year, Iowa teachers are expected to be differentiating within the core standards and using student performance data for assessments aligned to these geography standards. Some of the benefits of GIS is that it's ubiquitous in everyday living and in professional realms, yet in American classrooms it's still minimally used. GIS has been shown to increase student engagement and improve content knowledge and geography skills. Higher level thinking skills emerge when students use GIS. Some of the barriers related to GIS include the fact that teachers are overwhelmed at the prospect of trying to implement something new due to the many constraints on their time and energies. A positive teacher disposition is necessary for GIS to be implemented well, but once exposed, teachers do report positive dispositions toward it. They tell us that the activities related to GIS have to align with their standards and not be a waste of time or money. Having ready-to-use materials is important to them. In the past, a group of researchers with Hammond in 2019 developed a full curriculum surrounding the ArcGIS tool. This started with a summer intensive training and then a 3-month implementation period during the school year. Hammond's group found that this robust professional development background and the socio-environmental science investigations that they created were very successful at supporting implementation of GIS in the schools and supporting spatial thinking skills growth. Some of the gaps in the Hammond research include the fact that there was no differentiation for advanced learning and for advanced learners, and that there was no quantitative measurement reported of student growth. Hammond also admitted that the quantity of technology and the investment of time were just too much for a typical execution in a public high school. The second intervention I focused on was from Liu in 2010. Liu's group tested GIS versus non-GIS in a problem-based learning situation in Singapore. The findings with the Liu study were that students using GIS revealed higher level thinking skills like analysis and evaluation. Students who didn't use GIS demonstrated more lower level thinking skills like recall and memorization. 2 of the gaps in the Liu research include that the assessment was a self-developed measurement and that it was a very, very small group of participants in a specialized Singapore high school. The purpose of my study was to answer this question: what's the impact of using geographic information systems on 9th grade geography students' ability to create geographic representations? This relates directly to Iowa Core Social Studies Standard SS-GO.9-12.14, and I wanted to make sure that GIS was an effective tool in our classrooms. My hypothesis was that if 9th grade geography students were receiving instruction at the universal tier using a geographic information system, their scores measuring their ability to create geographic representations should improve more so than those of the control group. There were 2 levels of independent variables in my study. The first was the experimental geography teaching strategy of GIS, and the second was the legacy geography teaching strategy of using static maps. The dependent variable in my study was students' ability to create geographic representations. Possible impacts of my work were to aid teachers in creating and implementing these ready-to-use differentiated instructions using GIS. And secondly, I wanted to support my partner teacher and myself in fulfilling mandates to align instruction and assessment to geography standards. The structure of my research plan was a practical action research plan with a quasi-experimental, non-equivalent control group design. The participants in my study were public high school students enrolled in an elective geography course in suburban central Iowa. They were ages 14 and 15 with 27% low socioeconomic status. 57% of my participants were male and 43% female. 87% of them were Caucasian, 11% Hispanic, and 2% Black. There were 47 total students in my study from 2 classes. The control group had 27 students and the experimental group had 20 students. The partner teacher is a geography teacher who has pre-existing positive disposition toward technology and tiered instruction. Our students used Chromebooks and our teachers used Apple MacBooks. For software, we had the Chrome web browser, MapMaker Interactive, the Esri Story Maps, and the Google suite of classroom products. We also had legacy paper maps for a material, and then our measurement was previous NAEP geography assessment questions. NAEP employs an independent validity studies panel on validity and reliability. The score of their construct validity was 3.79 out of 4.0, and this is specific to alignment with state standards. We started out by administering a pretest to establish a baseline, and then we jumped right into the unit on population. This is the normal population unit, and the teacher designed activities surrounding that theme. The experimental group was exposed to GIS activities, with basic instruction from him to orient the students to the applications. And then the control group was exposed to the exact same learning targets and exact same activities, except instead of using the GIS maps, they used the legacy teaching tool of static maps. After 4 weeks, we administered a post-test to determine any improvement, and then I analyzed that data using independent samples t-tests. There was not a statistically significant increase in student geography scores as a result of the GIS intervention. My baseline groups were statistically similar. The control group's mean score was 6.0 with a standard deviation of 1.961, and my experimental group's mean was a 5.3 with a standard deviation of 2.697. The t-statistic resulting from this data was 1.031. The fact that it was below 2 demonstrated the similarity of those two groups with a p-value of 0.308. At the end of the study, the two groups were still statistically similar. The control group's mean score was now 6.63 with a standard deviation of 1.864. My experimental group's mean score was now 5.95 with a standard deviation of 2.502. Again, demonstrating with a t-statistic of 1.068 that the two groups were still statistically similar at a p-value of 0.291. Table 1 demonstrates the results from the independent samples t-tests. You can see the t-values of 1.031 on pretest and 1.068 on the post-tests. In Figure 1, you see the relative parallelism of the two scores. The control group's mean scores improved by 6.3%, and the experimental group's mean scores improved slightly more by 6.5%, but still not statistically significant, meaning the null hypothesis could not be rejected. I learned from this study that both the legacy and GIS tools supported improving students' geography skills, but the results did not support my hypothesis that GIS would improve these skills more so than the legacy teaching strategy. The difference between my teaching strategies was not statistically significant, and we cannot reject that null hypothesis. Based on GIS successes in past research, I did expect more statistically significant increases in their skills when they were taught using GIS as opposed to the static maps. My results just simply did not bear this out. I did measure different metrics than past research, but in general, my research either supported or at least didn't contradict major past research. The Hammond work found strong student engagement. While that wasn't specifically measured for this study, the students did self-report enjoying using GIS, confirming that Hammond work. The students in my study were disengaged from the measurement when they weren't able to answer, not supporting that Hammond work. Hammond's study also found that the robust professional development supported implementation of GIS in the schools. I found that shorter teacher training and student mini lessons were sufficient for a basic implementation. This contradicted the need for large-scale implementation. In Liu's study, he used project-based learning, and he found that students exhibited higher-level thinking when they were using GIS instead of static maps. His measurement was project-based and not standardized. My current study did not measure what sort of thinking skills students were exhibiting, neither confirming nor contradicting the Liu work. Lastly, the theoretical framework of my study was Vygotsky's social constructivism, and this did support the peer interactions and group work that was involved with learning and applying GIS. My participants reported enjoying the peer support, confirming social constructivism as a theoretical framework, and my partner teacher reported that the students relied on each other well when they were using GIS, with him as available to them for an expert. Implications for the classroom were that using GIS is definitely supportive of improving students' geography skills. It was no worse than using the static maps, and in fact was slightly better than that. The implication for the classroom is that incorporating modern technology in education is to be encouraged. To reject using this technology would be unjustified based on my study. GIS could be well used as a tool within social constructivist models like inquiry, flipped classrooms, and discovery learning. This work supported peer-to-peer interaction, collaboration, and communication, all important in 21st century classrooms. Implications for students and teachers. For teachers, this means one more tool that they can use in their toolbox of strategies to engage students in learning. Both teachers and students reported positive responses to the GIS models, and this incorporation of technology in classrooms helps prepare students for future work or future education. An interesting side note to this was that it was of zero financial cost to our school district. In fact, we achieved savings financially by not making paper copies of maps to be distributed to students. Limitations from my study and recommendations for future research include some that were directly related to the measurement. My NAEP-based geography test was problematic in that it introduced internal pretest sensitization threat and internal instrumentation threat. We used the same pre and post tests, and the static maps published by NAEP are of poor quality, and the questions are very old. Recommendations to improve that would be to expand that questions bank that we used, or perhaps expand the study beyond 4 weeks. To minimize instrumentation threat, I would suggest potentially even choosing a different measure of effectiveness. Unfortunately, currently published standardized tests don't lend themselves well to inquiry-based learning. There was internal validity threat and external multiple treatment threat because we included the element of inquiry into this study. I would recommend excluding that the next time and isolating the GIS variable to allow for the partner teacher to have a full focus on GIS. External selection treatment interaction threat was introduced because this is an elective course, and the existence of an AP human geography alternative means that my student population was perhaps not representative of the broader student population. I would recommend broadening this to include all geography courses at the school, and then randomly selecting students to participate from all students in a grade level instead of using preformed, fully random groups. Lastly, we had external reactive arrangement novelty effect. You could minimize this by extending the study for a longer period of time to allow participants to better adapt to the novelty of GIS. In conclusion, using GIS as a teaching tool in this geography classroom is not inappropriate. It was at least as effective as the legacy method of static maps, and it incorporates modern technology into the classroom in a way that supports improvements of students' abilities to make geographic representations.